The earth pressed against Yukiko's face like a lover's hand, gentle at first, then suffocating. She'd stopped screaming 2 feet down, or maybe it had been 3. Depth lost meaning when dirt filled your mouth, when darkness became absolute, when the ceremonial circle above you glowed with candlelight you'd never see again. Above her, the soil trembled with the weight of dancing feet. Drums pounded in rhythm with her failing heart. A heart that shouldn't still be beating, that should have surrendered minutes ago to the inevitability of the grave. Voices rose in ancient wolf tongue, calling to the moon goddess in words that tasted of blood and legacy and judgment for sins Yukiko had never committed. The Luna ceremony. The blessing of the new moon. The purification of the pack through sacrifice. And Yukiko Powell was the sacrifice. She tried to move her arms, but the burial shroud they'd wrapped her in. Blessed silk, they'd called it, as if pretty words made suffocation holy, held her limbs tight against her sides. They'd taken everything before sealing her in the grave. Her mother's jade ring, her worn traveling boots, even the small knife she'd used to cut herbs during her years as a rogue, hiding in forests where pack law couldn't reach. Run, her mother had whispered the night before the hunters found them, her voice already weakening from the poison they'd given her in prison. Run and never let them see your face. They'll know you by your father's crime, and they'll bury you for it. But Yukiko hadn't run far enough. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. The Moonstone Pack's trackers had found her at dawn, 3 miles from the border, heading toward the neutral territories where bloodline didn't matter. She'd been gathering water from a stream, her guard down for the first time in months, when their wolves had surrounded her with military precision. They hadn't needed to ask her name. They'd known her scent, known what it meant. Cursed blood, killer's daughter, the one who lived when she should have died with him. Above, the drums stopped. Yukiko's breath caught, or tried to. There wasn't enough air left for catching. In the sudden silence, she could hear her own pulse thundering in her skull, could feel the earth around her humming with something that wasn't quite vibration. The temperature dropped, and frost crept across the inside of her burial shroud. Then came the howl. It started somewhere beyond the grave, beyond the ceremony grounds, maybe beyond the mortal world itself. Low and resonant, it rose until it filled the earth surrounding her, until it filled her chest cavity where her lungs were collapsing, until it became the only sound in existence. It wasn't just a wolf's cry. It was older than wolves, primal in a way that made her human consciousness want to fracture rather than comprehend it. The Alpha King had arrived. Footsteps thundered above, hundreds of them, moving toward the ritual circle's center. More howls joined the first, a chorus of submission and reverence. Yukiko tried to claw at the silk binding her arms, knowing it was useless, knowing she had seconds left, but unable to stop herself. Her mother's final warning echoed through her oxygen-starved mind. They'll know you by your heart, daughter. That strange, glowing heart you were born with. They'll call it a curse. They'll say it proves your father's madness lives in your blood, and they will bury you to keep it from spreading. Her chest grew warm, then hot. The glow, the one she'd hidden her entire life beneath thick clothing and shame, began to pulse. Faint red light seeped through the silk shroud, through the packed earth, reaching toward the surface like a desperate prayer. No, not now. Don't let them see. Above ground, someone shouted. The drums resumed, faster now, frantic. More voices joined, confusion rippling through the ceremony's perfect choreography. Yukiko's vision was fading, black spots consuming what little consciousness remained when she felt it. A presence, vast and ancient and searching. It swept across the ceremony grounds like an invisible wave, and when it reached her grave, when it found that glowing heart still beating beneath 6 feet of earth, it stopped. Everything stopped. The drums, the howling, the very air itself seemed to freeze. And then Yukiko heard something impossible. A heartbeat. Not hers, though hers was slowing, stuttering, preparing for its final beat. This one was strong, thunderous, echoing through the earth like a war drum. And it was responding to hers, syncing with it, matching its rhythm even as her own tried to fail. Thump, 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 2 hearts, beating as one. The shouting above turned to chaos. Someone roared, a sound too deep, too powerful to be human. The earth around Yukiko's grave began to shake. "No," a voice thundered, rattling the stones of the ceremonial circle. "No, this can't be." Claws tore through soil. Massive hands, fever-hot and trembling, ripped through the layers of earth, through the blessed shroud, finding her face in the darkness. Light flooded in, blinding after the absolute black, and Yukiko gasped, actually gasped, pulling air into lungs that had forgotten how to work. She was yanked upward with inhuman strength, soil cascading off her body, the burial shroud tearing away. For a moment she couldn't see anything, couldn't process the firelight, or the hundreds of shocked faces, or the candles that had been arranged around her grave like a funeral wreath. She could only feel the hands gripping, her shoulders. Could only smell the scent wrapping around her like smoke. Pine and winter storms, and something wild that made every instinct she'd suppressed for years suddenly roar to life. Then her vision cleared, and she found herself staring into eyes the color of molten amber. The Alpha King. He was on his knees in the dirt of her grave, his formal ceremonial robes filthy with soil, his long dark hair falling across his face. Powerful shoulders heaved beneath the fur-lined cloak he wore, and his hands, still gripping her arms, shook with barely contained violence. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. Wide with something between revelation and horror, they searched her face like he was seeing the answer to a question that terrified him. "What are you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Yukiko tried to speak, but her throat was raw from screaming, from dirt, from death that hadn't quite taken her. She managed only a cough that brought up soil. The Alpha King's grip tightened, not painful but inescapable. His gaze dropped to her chest, where her torn clothing revealed the source of that supernatural glow. Her heart, visible through her skin, pulsed with red light that matched the rhythm of his own heartbeat. His breath caught. "No, this is wrong. You're—" He stopped himself, released her so abruptly she nearly fell back into the grave. Took 3 steps back, his chest heaving, his hands curling into fists at his sides. The pack had erupted around them. Hundreds of wolves, in human and beast form, pressed close to the ceremonial circle, their voices rising in confusion and anger. Yukiko caught fragments of their shouts. "Stopped the sacrifice. The ritual isn't complete. Cursed blood still lives." An elder stepped forward from the crowd, his silver hair braided with ceremony beads, his face twisted with outrage. "Alpha King McCloskey, the law of blood atonement demands— I know what it demands." McCloskey's roar shook the very ground. Several pack members dropped instantly to their knees, baring their throats in automatic submission. "And I will decide how to proceed." The elder's jaw clenched, but he bowed his head, unable to meet the Alpha King's eyes. McCloskey turned back to Yukiko, and she saw the war raging behind his expression. Duty versus instinct. Law versus something that had ignited the moment he'd heard her heartbeat through the earth. "Chain her," he said, his voice devoid of the emotion that had flickered across his face moments before. "In the North Tower, iron restraints. No one touches her. No one speaks to her." But Alpha King, another elder protested, a silver-haired man whose scent made Yukiko's skin crawl, wrong somehow, like rotted meat hidden under perfume. The prophecy states clearly that cursed blood must return to the earth. If we don't complete... Elder Thorn. McCloskey's voice dropped to something more dangerous than shouting. I am aware of what the prophecy states. I am also aware that pack law grants the Alpha King authority over all ceremonies and judgments. His amber eyes flicked back to Yukiko, and she saw his jaw tighten. This matter requires investigation. Thorn's expression soured, but he bowed, too stiffly, too slowly, and stepped back. Guards appeared at Yukiko's sides, two massive warriors who hauled her to her feet without gentleness. Her legs didn't want to work, numb from burial and oxygen deprivation. She stumbled, and they simply lifted her between them like she weighed nothing. Before they could drag her away, McCloskey's gaze found hers one last time. In his eyes, she saw fear. Not of her, but of what she represented. Of the impossible bond that had forced him to tear through sacred ground with his bare hands. You should have stayed hidden, he said, too softly for anyone but her to hear. Because now, cursed or not, prophecy or not, you're mine. And I'm going to have to figure out whether that means I protect you. His jaw clenched. Or finish what the grave started. The North Tower had no windows. Yukiko discovered this in the first 10 seconds of her imprisonment, when the guards shoved her through an iron door, and she heard it clang shut behind her, swallowing even the torchlight from the corridor. Darkness pressed in from all sides, different from the grave's darkness, but no less suffocating, broken only by a thin line of orange glow seeping under the door. She stood frozen, afraid to move in case she stumbled into something sharp, or fell downstairs she couldn't see. Her lungs still ached from the burial, every breath a reminder that she'd come within seconds of her last one. Her torn dress hung in dirty tatters, and soil was caked beneath her fingernails from her futile attempts to claw free. You're mine. McCloskey's words circled through her mind like wolves around wounded prey. She'd heard possession in his voice, yes, but also confusion. Horror, even, as if discovering her, discovering that impossible heartbeat synchronization, had shattered something fundamental in his understanding of the world. Their eyes had met, and reality itself had shifted. Yukiko pressed her palms against the cold stone wall, grounding herself. She needed to think, needed to understand what had happened at that ceremonial circle. Why a man who'd been prepared to let her suffocate had instead torn through earth with his bare hands like a creature possessed. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness. Not completely, there simply wasn't enough light. But gradually she made out the shape of the room. Small. Circular. Walls that curved up into shadow above her head. Stone floor. No furniture except what felt like a pallet of blankets in one corner. And that scent again. Faint but unmistakable, clinging to everything. Pine and winter storms and wild places where human laws didn't reach. Him. Yukiko's stomach twisted. This was his space. Had been his space at some point. She could smell it, in the stones, could sense it in the way the air felt charged, like the moments before lightning strikes. The Alpha King had locked her in his own tower. She sank onto the blanket pallet, her body finally giving out. Every muscle trembled with exhaustion and shock. She'd been buried alive. She'd died, for all practical purposes. And then he'd pulled her back, had dragged her from that grave with hands that shook like he was touching something sacred or cursed. Outside the door, she heard guards taking position. Their low voices carried through the iron. Did you see his face when he dug her up? Saw him break protocol. Saw him ruin a ceremony that's been performed for 3 centuries. Think she's really his mate. That's what they're saying. That he scented her through 6 feet of earth. Cursed blood doesn't get a mate bond, that's impossible. Tell that to the Alpha King. Silence, heavy with implication. Then, Elder Thorne's calling an emergency council meeting. Says McCloskey's judgment is compromised. Says that girl needs to go back in the ground before she destroys everything. Yukiko's chest tightened. Her glowing heart, visible even now through her torn dress, pulsed faster. She'd escaped the grave only to land in a different kind of tomb. This one had stone walls instead of earth, iron chains instead of silk shrouds. But the ending would be the same. Unless she could figure out why the Alpha King's heart had answered hers. Unless she could survive long enough to understand what that impossible connection meant. Outside, the full moon rose above the Moonstone Pack's territory, and somewhere in the compound, McCloskey Bryce stood in his private chambers, staring at his hands. Hands that still trembled with the memory of digging through earth, of finding that glowing heart still beating when it should have been silent. And for the first time in his reign, the Alpha King didn't know whether he'd saved a life or doomed his entire pack. McCloskey Bryce had presided over 7 Luna ceremonies in his 12 years as Alpha King, and not once had he felt anything beyond duty's cold weight settling across his shoulders. The ritual was ancient, sacred, necessary, or so the Council of Elders insisted. Blood for blood, balance for betrayal, a life to cleanse the pack of the sins committed against it. Tonight should have been no different. He stood at the edge of the ceremonial circle, watching his pack move through the choreography of centuries. Wolves in human form danced around the freshly dug grave, their feet bare against earth still damp from yesterday's rain. Candles flickered in spiral patterns, their flames bending toward the center, where the cursed bloodline would be returned to the soil. The drums pounded. 7 drummers positioned at 7 compass points, their rhythm matching the pulse of the full moon overhead. McCloskey's formal robes felt too tight across his shoulders. His wolf prowled beneath his skin, restless in a way that made no sense. This was tradition. This was justice for Luna Seraphine, murdered 20 years ago by a wolf driven mad with jealousy and rage. Her killer had died that same night, torn apart by the pack. But his daughter had escaped. Until 3 days ago, when the trackers had finally found her. The girl, Yukiko Powell, they'd told him, though he'd refused to learn more, refused to see her before this moment, had been wrapped in blessed silk and lowered into the grave an hour before moonrise. Standard protocol. Painless, the council assured him. She would simply fall asleep as the air ran out, her cursed heart finally silenced. McCloskey's own heart twisted at the thought, and he forced the feeling down. Mercy had no place in pack law. His father had taught him that. His grandfather before him. To lead was to make choices that would haunt you, to carry the weight of necessary cruelty so your pack could thrive. The drums reached their crescendo. Elder Thorne stepped forward, his silver hair gleaming in the candlelight, his voice rising in the old tongue as he blessed the grave and called upon the moon goddess to accept the offering. McCloskey felt his jaw tighten. Something was wrong. His wolf was snarling now, clawing at his control with frantic urgency. The air tasted strange, electric, like the moments before a lightning strike. And there was a sound, barely audible beneath the drums that made his teeth ache. Thump, 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 thump. A heartbeat. But not just any heartbeat. This one resonated inside his skull, inside his chest cavity, like it was his own pulse echoing back at him. Impossible. The grave was 6 feet deep, packed with earth. He shouldn't be able to hear anything from... Pain lanced through his sternum, sharp and brutal. McCloskey gasped, his hand flying to his chest as his knees nearly buckled. His wolf roared, demanding, commanding him to move. The heartbeat was failing, slowing, dying. And something in McCloskey's very DNA revolted at the thought. His body moved before his mind could catch up. He was crossing the ceremonial circle, shoving dancers aside, his vision tunneling to that freshly packed earth. Someone shouted, Thorn, probably, demanding he stop, that he was disrupting the ritual. But McCloskey couldn't hear words anymore. Could only hear that stuttering heartbeat and his wolf's anguished howl. Mate! 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 No, that was impossible. He didn't have a mate. He'd never scented one, never felt the pull that older wolves spoke of with reverence and fear. And the girl in that grave was cursed blood, marked for death before she was born. But his hands were already clawing at the earth. Soil flew behind him as he dug with inhuman strength, his fingernails tearing, his formal robes shredding. Wolves were shouting now, the drums had stopped, but McCloskey couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. 6 feet had never seemed so deep. Each second felt like hours as that heartbeat grew weaker, as his wolf screamed in anguish. That made no sense. 3 feet down. 4. His hands hit blessed silk and he ripped through it like paper. 5 feet. 6. His fingers found her face, cold, dirt-covered, still, and McCloskey's heart stopped entirely. He hauled her up through layers of earth, cradling her against his chest as he climbed from the grave. Her head lolled back, lifeless, her dark hair matted with soil. But her chest was glowing. Faint red light pulsed beneath torn fabric and dirt-stained skin, and McCloskey felt his breath catch as he realized what he was seeing. Her heart. Literally glowing through her ribcage like a beacon. And it was beating in perfect synchronization with his own. Yukiko's eyes flew open, dark and wild and terrified, and she dragged in a gasping breath that sounded like resurrection itself. Her body convulsed in his arms as oxygen flooded her system, and McCloskey found himself holding her tighter, his hand cradling the back of her head as she coughed up soil. Their eyes met. The world detonated. McCloskey had heard stories about mate bonds his entire life. The older wolves spoke of it like a religious experience. The moment when you scented your fated one. When every instinct you possessed screamed that this person was yours to protect, to claim, to die for. He'd always thought they were exaggerating. They hadn't been. The scent hit him like a physical blow. Moonflowers and rain-soaked earth, and something uniquely her that made his wolf surge forward with possessive fury. His hands trembled against her skin, fever-hot despite the night air. Every nerve in his body was alight, every sense hyper-aware of the way she fit against his chest, the way her heartbeat, that glowing, impossible heartbeat, matched his own. Mine, his wolf snarled. Ours. Mate. Yukiko stared up at him with those dark eyes, still gasping for air, still trembling with shock. And McCloskey saw the exact moment she felt it too. The bond snapping into place between them, undeniable and absolute. Her pupils dilated, her breath hitched, her glowing heart pulsed brighter. "What are you?" he heard himself whisper, though he wasn't sure if he was asking her or asking the moon goddess why she would do this to him. The ceremonial circle had erupted into chaos. Hundreds of voices rose in confusion and outrage, wolves pressing forward to see what their alpha king had done. McCloskey heard fragments of their shouts: sacrilege, desecration, the ritual, cursed blood, but couldn't process them past the roaring in his skull. Elder Thorn was suddenly there, his face twisted with fury. "Alpha King, you've stopped the blood atonement. The ceremony is over," McCloskey growled, his voice dropping to something that made even Thorn take an involuntary step back. He rose to his feet, still cradling Yukiko against his chest, and turned to face his pack. 700 wolves stared back at him. Some looked shocked, others horrified. A few, the younger ones, the romantics, looked awed. McCloskey's jaw clenched. This was impossible. This was a disaster. This girl was supposed to die tonight, and instead she was his mate, and he had just destroyed a sacred ceremony in front of his entire pack to save her. But as his wolf snarled its satisfaction, as Yukiko's heartbeat continued to match his own, McCloskey realized he would do it again. would tear through the earth with his bare hands 1,000 times over if it meant keeping that glowing heart beating. "She's mine," he said, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "My fated mate. The moon goddess has spoken." The ceremonial circle exploded into pandemonium. Yukiko woke choking on soil that wasn't there anymore. Her body jerked upright, hands clawing at her throat, her lungs screaming for air they'd already found. For a disorienting moment, she was back in the grave, earth filling her mouth, darkness crushing her chest. That final heartbeat fading. "Easy. You're safe. Breathe." The voice cut through her panic, low and feminine and utterly calm. Yukiko's vision cleared slowly, revealing a circular stone room lit by a single oil lamp, the North Tower. She remembered the guards dragging her here, remembered the door slamming shut, remembered collapsing onto the blanket pallet. She didn't remember falling asleep, wasn't sure she had. A woman sat in a chair beside the pallet, her posture relaxed, but her dark eyes sharp as flint. She looked to be in her 50s, her silver-streaked black hair pulled into a severe bun, her clothing practical, leather vest over a linen shirt, boots designed for function rather than ceremony. Everything about her screamed authority tempered by pragmatism. "Who?" Yukiko's voice cracked, raw from screaming and soil and suffocation. She coughed, tasting dirt, and spat into her palm. Her hand came away with dark earth mixed with blood. "Maven Frost, the Alpha King's senior advisor." The woman leaned forward, offering a clay cup of water. "Drink slowly. Your throat's been through trauma." Yukiko wanted to refuse, trust no one, her mother had taught her. But her body overruled her mind. She took the cup with trembling hands and sipped. The water was cool and tasted faintly of mint. She drank half before her stomach clenched in warning. Maven nodded approvingly. "Good. You've got survival instincts. You'll need them." Yukiko set the cup down and looked at herself for the first time since waking. Her dress was still torn and filthy, her arms covered in bruises from the guard's grip, her fingernails broken and bloody from her futile attempts to claw free of the grave. But it was her chest that drew her gaze, the faint red glow still pulsing beneath her skin, visible even through the dirt and fabric. Her cursed heart. The thing that had marked her as different her entire life. The thing that had just saved her life. "Why?" Yukiko's voice was barely a whisper. "Why did he stop the ceremony?" Maven's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Understanding, maybe. Or pity. "You really don't know?" "Know what?" "What you are to him." Maven stood, moving to the small window, the only one in the tower, Yukiko realized, just a narrow slit that let in moonlight and cold air. 20 years ago, your father, Hayato Powell, killed Luna Seraphine during a full moon gathering. He was her personal guard, trusted by the entire pack. No one saw it coming. Yukiko's chest tightened. She'd heard versions of this story her whole life, each one more horrible than the last. Her mother had refused to speak of it, had only said that Hayato had lost his mind, that the madness had taken him so completely that he'd forgotten he had a family to protect. "Pack law is absolute," Maven continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "The law of blood atonement states that when a wolf commits an unforgivable crime, the murder of a Luna, the betrayal of the Alpha King, the slaughter of children, their entire bloodline must be erased. Your father died that night, torn apart by the pack. Your mother fled with you before they could finish the job." She turned to face Yukiko. "You were 3 years old. Do you remember any of it?" Yukiko shook her head. Her earliest memories were of hiding, running. Her mother's frightened face in the darkness, always looking over her shoulder. "Your mother kept you hidden for 15 years before the poison caught up with her. The council had been searching for you both that entire time." Maven's jaw tightened. "When they found her, they offered mercy, a quick death by wolfsbane if she revealed where you were. She refused. Took 3 days to die. The words hit like physical blows. Yukiko had known her mother was dead, had felt it somehow, the moment it happened 2 years ago. But hearing the details, understanding that her mother had been tortured for information she'd never give. The trackers finally found you 3 days ago. By law, your execution should have been immediate, but the elders decided to make an example of you. The Luna ceremony was coming up. Perfect timing. Maven's expression softened almost imperceptibly. They buried you alive as a blood offering to appease the moon goddess for your father's crime. And then he stopped it. Yukiko's voice was hollow. The Alpha King, McCloskey. I felt something when he touched me, when our eyes met. The mate bond, Maven said it like a diagnosis. It's rare. Maybe 1 in 1,000 wolves finds their fated mate. When you do, it's... She paused, searching for words. Absolute. Undeniable. Your wolf recognizes them on an instinctual level that overrides logic or choice. Their scent becomes the only thing you want to breathe. Their heartbeat becomes your heartbeat. Yukiko's glowing heart pulsed faster, and she pressed her hand against it, feeling the rhythm that had matched McCloskey's perfectly when he'd pulled her from the grave. He scented you through 6 feet of earth, Maven continued. Heard your heartbeat failing and lost his mind trying to reach you. I've known McCloskey Bryce since he was 8 years old, and I've never seen him break protocol. He's duty incarnate. But tonight he tore through a sacred ceremony with his bare hands, because his wolf was screaming that you were dying. She leaned against the wall. Congratulations, you're the Alpha King's fated mate. The words should have brought relief. Hope, even. Instead, they settled over Yukiko like another kind of burial shroud. But the law, she whispered, the blood atonement, still stands. Maven's voice went cold. That's the problem. McCloskey stopped your execution on instinct, but instinct doesn't override centuries of pack law. The Council of Elders is convening now. They're going to demand your death, mate bond or not. As if summoned by her words, footsteps echoed in the tower's stairwell. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. The door swung open, and 2 guards entered. The same ones who'd locked Yukiko in here hours ago. The council summons the prisoner, one said, his voice carefully neutral. Maven's jaw clenched. She's not a prisoner. She's the Alpha King's. The council summons her. The guard repeated, harder this time. By order of Elder Thorn. Yukiko rose on unsteady legs. Her body felt wrong, too heavy, too fragile, like it still belonged partially to the grave. Maven moved to her side, and for a moment Yukiko thought the advisor might argue, might refuse to let them take her. Instead, Maven leaned close and whispered, "Whatever happens in that room, don't show fear. The elders are wolves. They'll tear you apart if they smell weakness." The guards escorted Yukiko down the spiral staircase, through corridors lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on stone walls. She could hear voices ahead, dozens of them, arguing in harsh tones that echoed through the compound, the council chamber. They stopped before massive double doors carved with the pack's crest, a wolf beneath a full moon, its jaws open in a howl. The guards pushed the doors open, and Yukiko was shoved inside. The chamber was circular, like the tower, but 3 times as large. Tiered stone benches rose in levels around a central floor, and on those benches sat the Council of Elders, 20 wolves whose combined age probably exceeded 5 centuries. Their faces were hard, their eyes cold, their collective judgment pressing down on Yukiko like physical weight. And standing at the chamber's center, his formal robes replaced by simpler clothing, his amber eyes finding hers the instant she entered, was McCloskey Bryce. Their hearts synchronized immediately. That same pulse, that same rhythm. Yukiko felt the mate bond pull taut between them, demanding she move closer, that she seek the protection of the one wolf in this room who'd already proven he'd tear the earth apart for her. But she forced herself to stay still, to lift her chin despite the fear clawing it. her throat. Elder Thorn rose from his seat at the highest tier, his silver hair gleaming in the torchlight. His smile was cold as winter as he looked down at Yukiko. Yukiko Powell, daughter of the traitor Hayato Powell. Cursed blood that should have been erased 20 years ago. His voice carried through the chamber like a pronouncement of doom. You stand before this council accused of crimes committed by your bloodline. How do you plead? Yukiko met his gaze and didn't flinch. I plead that I am not my father. Your father's blood runs in your veins. His madness lives in your cursed heart. Thorn's eyes dropped to the glow still visible through her torn dress. By the law of blood atonement, you are guilty simply by existing. Then your law is unjust, Yukiko said, and the chamber exploded. Elders were on their feet, shouting over each other, their voices crashing together like thunder. Yukiko caught fragments, heresy, disrespect, kill her now, but kept her eyes locked on Elder Thorn. His face had gone cold with fury, his lips pulling back from teeth that looked too sharp for a human mouth. Silence. McCloskey's roar cut through the chaos like a blade. The chamber fell quiet so abruptly that Yukiko's ears rang. The Alpha King stood perfectly still at the center of the floor, but power radiated from him in waves that made the torches flicker. She speaks from ignorance of our ways. That is not a crime punishable by death. Not a crime? Thorn's voice dripped venom. She stands before this council and calls our most sacred law unjust. She is my mate. McCloskey's words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Recognized by the moon goddess herself. Or do you question the goddess's wisdom, Elder Thorn? The threat beneath the question was unmistakable. Thorn's jaw worked, but he couldn't respond without committing blasphemy himself. Several other elders shifted uncomfortably on their benches. The mate bond does not erase her bloodline's crimes, another elder spoke up. An ancient woman with blind white eyes and a voice like grinding stone. The law of blood atonement predates even the mate bond traditions. It was written when the first pacts formed, when we learned that madness and betrayal can live in the blood itself, passed from parent to child like a disease. Then we find another way. McCloskey's hands clenched at his sides. Yukiko could see the tension coiled in his shoulders, could feel through their bond how close his wolf was to the surface. I will not execute my fated mate based on crimes she did not commit. You have no choice. Thorn slammed his hand against the stone armrest of his seat. The law is absolute. If we make an exception for her, what message does that send? That the Alpha King's desires override pack justice? That bloodline crimes can be forgiven if you're fortunate enough to catch his scent? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the council. Yukiko's heart, that glowing, cursed heart, pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but Maven's warning echoed in her mind. Don't show fear. McCloskey turned to face the council fully, and Yukiko saw the calculation in his eyes. The leader weighing options, measuring political costs, searching for a path that wouldn't end with her back in that grave. The trial of atonement, he said quietly. The chamber went utterly still. No, Maven's voice came from somewhere behind Yukiko. McCloskey, you can't. The trial of atonement, he repeated, louder now, addressing the council. It's pack law, is it not? An alternative to execution for those whose crimes are complicated, those who might still prove their worth despite their bloodline. Thorn's eyes narrowed. The trial of atonement hasn't been invoked in 70 years, and it was designed for pack members who committed crimes themselves, not for cursed blood. But it is law, McCloskey pressed, written into the same code as the blood atonement. If she passes the trial, her bloodline's crimes are considered paid. She earns her place in the pack. And if she fails? The blind elder asked. Then she returns to the grave. McCloskey's voice didn't waver, but Yukiko felt the anguish pulse through their bond. Permanently. Yukiko's breath caught. He was gambling with her life, but she understood the strategy. Give the council something, a punishment, a test, a way to satisfy their bloodlust without immediate execution. Buy time, buy a chance, however slim. The elders were conferring among themselves now, their voices low and urgent. Thorn looked furious, but several others appeared thoughtful. Finally, the blind elder raised her hand for silence. The trial of atonement requires unanimous council approval, she said, and the conditions must be appropriate to the crime. If we agree to this, she will not receive mercy simply because she is the Alpha King's mate. The trial must be harsh enough to satisfy the law of blood atonement. Name your conditions, McCloskey said through gritted teeth. Thorn stood slowly, and Yukiko saw the cruel satisfaction spreading across his face. He'd lost the immediate execution, but he was going to make her pay for it. Iron chains, he began. Forged from pure iron, blessed with wolfsbane oil, she will wear them on her wrists and ankles at all times. No removal, no exceptions. Yukiko's stomach dropped. Iron burned werewolf skin on contact. Wolfsbane made it worse, a poison that would seep into her system slowly, weakening her, making every movement agony. She will work as the pack's lowest servant, Thorn continued, warming to his theme. Kitchen duties, cleaning, whatever tasks the pack Omega assigns. She will sleep in the servants' quarters. She will eat only what remains after the pack has fed. Agreed, McCloskey said, his voice hollow. She will not shift into wolf form for the duration of the trial. If she shifts even once, she fails. Thorn's smile was vicious now. Denying her wolf will drive her mad within months. How long? Maven demanded from behind Yukiko. How long does this trial last? Until the next full moon cycle, the blind elder said. 3 months. If she survives that long and has proven her worth through service and suffering, the council will vote on whether her bloodline's debt is paid. 3 months of iron chains and wolfsbane. 3 months of slavery and torture. 3 months of fighting her wolf's instinct to shift, to run, to be free. Yukiko swayed on her feet, but forced herself to remain standing. One more condition, Thorn said, and his eyes flicked between Yukiko and McCloskey with calculated malice. Physical contact between the prisoner and the Alpha King is forbidden. No touching, no private meetings, no interference with the trial. If either of them breaks this rule, it will be considered conspiracy to undermine pack justice, and she will be executed immediately. The cruelty of it was surgical. The mate bond would drive them toward each other, would make separation physically painful. Denying touch when every instinct screamed for contact would be torture for both of them. McCloskey's hands were shaking now. You're asking me to watch my mate suffer and do nothing. We're asking you to prove that pack law matters more than your personal desires, Thorn shot back. Isn't that what you've always taught us, Alpha King? That duty comes before comfort? The words were McCloskey's own, thrown back in his face. Yukiko saw him flinch, saw the muscle jump in his jaw. Through their bond, she felt his rage and helplessness battering against the walls of his control. Do we have unanimous agreement? The blind elder asked. One by one, the elders raised their hands. Even those who looked uncomfortable voted yes. The alternative was civil war, the Alpha King defying the council, the pack fracturing between those who supported him and those who demanded traditional justice. 20 hands raised, unanimous. Then let the trial of atonement begin, the blind elder pronounced. Bring the chains. Guards appeared with iron shackles that gleamed with oily residue in the torchlight. Wolfsbane. Yukiko could smell it from across the chamber. Bitter and wrong, designed to poison slowly. The guards seized her arms, dragging her to the center of the floor. Wait, McCloskey said, his voice breaking. At least let me. You cannot touch her, Thorn said. You agreed to the terms, Alpha King. Step back. McCloskey looked at Yukiko, and she saw everything he couldn't say written in those amber eyes. I'm sorry. I'm trying to save you. This is the only way. Please survive this. Yukiko nodded once, telling him she understood. Then she lifted her wrists. The first shackle closed around her left wrist with a metallic click. The pain was immediate and absolute. Iron seared into her skin, and the wolfsbane oil burned like acid. Yukiko screamed, couldn't help it, couldn't stop it, as the guard locked the second shackle onto her right wrist. Her knees buckled, but hands held her upright, forced her to remain standing as they moved to her ankles. More clicks, more burning, more pain that obliterated thought and breath and everything except the sensation of her skin melting beneath blessed metal. Through the agony, through the screams tearing from her throat, Yukiko heard McCloskey's answering roar, raw and broken and full of rage he couldn't unleash. Their bond carried his anguish to her, mixing with her pain until she couldn't tell where hers ended and his began. The guards released her, and Yukiko collapsed to the stone floor. The chains were heavy, maybe 20 pounds of iron total, and every movement made them shift against her burns. She curled into herself, gasping, her glowing heart pulsing erratically beneath her ribs. 3 months, Thorne said, looking down at her with cold satisfaction. Let's see if cursed blood can endure. Through tears and pain, Yukiko lifted her head and met his gaze. She would survive this. She would survive to spite him, to prove her father's madness didn't live in her veins, to earn the right to stand beside the Alpha King who'd torn through Earth to save her. She would survive because the alternative was the grave, and she'd already died once. She wouldn't do it again. The iron had burned through the first 3 layers of skin by the end of the first week. Yukiko knew because she'd watched it happen, had felt each layer blister and peel and weep clear fluid that the wolfsbane turned black. The pack healer, a severe woman named Cordelia, who looked at Yukiko like she was examining a particularly interesting disease, had told her the chains would either kill her in the first month or her body would adapt. Werewolves have remarkable healing capabilities, Cordelia had said, prodding at the raw flesh with clinical detachment. But iron and wolfsbane together suppress that healing. Your body will try to repair itself and fail, try again and fail, until either it gives up or it finds a way to build scar tissue strong enough to protect you. She'd smiled then, cold and sharp. Most don't make it to the scar tissue stage. Yukiko was determined to be the exception. She knelt now in the great hall, scrubbing stone floors that had been scrubbed 1,000 times before, her chains clinking with every movement. The weight had become familiar, a constant 20-pound reminder of her status, her crime, her cursed blood. The burns had scabbed over in some places, torn open again in others. Her wrists and ankles were wrapped in crude bandages she'd fashioned from torn strips of her servant's dress. But the cloth did little to cushion iron against destroyed skin. A boot stepped deliberately into her bucket of wash water, splattering dirty suds across the section she'd just cleaned. Oops, the wolf, a young male named Garrett, said with mock concern. Guess you'll have to do it again, cursed blood. His friends laughed, their voices echoing off the high ceiling. Yukiko kept her eyes down and started re-scrubbing. Fighting back would only make it worse. She'd learned that the second day, when she'd snapped at a she-wolf who'd accidentally stepped on her chains, yanking them hard enough to tear the scabs on her ankles. The pack Omega had added latrine duty to her tasks as punishment. Maybe she'll curse us too, another wolf whispered, loud enough for Yukiko to hear. Maybe we'll all die in our sleep because we let her live. The fear beneath the cruelty was almost worse than the cruelty itself. They genuinely believed she carried death in her veins, that her father's madness was contagious, that proximity to her might doom them all. No amount of scrubbing floors would change that. Footsteps approached, lighter than the others, quicker. Yukiko glanced up and saw a girl no more than 12, with dark hair in 2 braids and amber eyes that looked startlingly familiar. The girl glanced around furtively, then crouched beside Yukiko and pressed a clay cup into her hands. Clean water, she whispered. You look like you need it. Yukiko stared at the cup, then at the girl. Up close, the resemblance was unmistakable. The same sharp cheekbones as McCloskey, the same proud tilt to her chin. "You're his sister." "Isla." The girl smiled tentatively. "And you're Yukiko. The whole pack's talking about you." She glanced at the chains, and something like sympathy crossed her young face. "Does it hurt?" "Yes." There was no point lying. "Good," Garrett called from across the hall. "She should hurt. Isla, get away from her before the curse spreads." Isla's jaw set in a stubborn line that reminded Yukiko painfully of McCloskey. "The moon goddess doesn't curse people for their parents' crimes. Sister Cordelia taught us that in lessons." "Sister Cordelia doesn't know everything," Garrett sneered. "Your brother made a mistake claiming her. You'll see." Isla opened her mouth to argue, but Yukiko shook her head slightly. "Thank you for the water," she said quietly. "But they're right. You shouldn't be seen with me." "That's stupid," Isla said, but she stood anyway, her eyes defiant as she looked at Garrett and his friends. "You're all stupid." Then she was gone, her footsteps quick and light, leaving Yukiko with clean water and a strange warmth in her chest that felt dangerously like hope. The moment didn't last. "Supply run," a guard named Rowan announced an hour later, his voice gruff but not unkind. He was older than most of the warriors, his hair more gray than brown, and he'd been one of the few who hadn't gone out of his way to make Yukiko's trial worse. "Healer needs herbs from the forest. You're coming." Yukiko struggled to her feet, her legs cramping after hours of kneeling. The chains made walking difficult. She'd learned to shuffle rather than stride, to keep the shackles from bouncing and tearing her. Wounds opened further. Rowan waited patiently while she found her balance, then led her out through the servants' entrance. The forest was a relief after days trapped inside stone walls. Autumn had painted the leaves gold and crimson, and the air smelled of earth and pine and freedom Yukiko couldn't touch. She followed Rowan along a narrow trail, gathering the herbs Cordelia had specified. Wolfsbane for medicinal use, ironically, along with yarrow and sage. "You're doing better than they expected," Rowan said as they worked, his eyes scanning the forest out of habit. "Thorn bet you wouldn't last 2 weeks." Yukiko's hand stilled on a cluster of sage. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because spite is a powerful motivator." Rowan smiled grimly. "And because I knew your mother. She worked in the pack kitchens before everything happened. Good woman. Didn't deserve what they did to her." The words settled over Yukiko like a blanket, unexpected comfort from an unexpected source. She opened her mouth to thank him, but Rowan had gone rigid, his nostrils flaring. "Blood," he said. "Fresh. Stay behind me." He shifted partially, bones cracking, claws extending, his face elongating into something between human and wolf. Yukiko's own wolf stirred beneath her skin, desperate to answer the call to shift, but she forced it down. Not allowed. If you shift, you die. Rowan moved through the undergrowth with predatory grace, and Yukiko followed as quietly as her chains would allow. The smell of blood grew stronger, mixed with something else. Something wrong. They found him in a clearing 20 yards from the trail. The body lay face up, arms sprawled wide, eyes frozen in an expression of pure terror. He'd been young, maybe 20, with the kind of aristocratic features that spoke of good bloodlines and better nutrition. His lips were blue, his fingernails purple, and foam had dried at the corners of his mouth. But it was his eyes that made Yukiko's stomach turn. Bloodshot so severely they looked more red than white, with tiny hemorrhages that had burst the vessels completely. "Moon's mercy," Rowan breathed. "That's Thorn's son, Marcus Jr." Yukiko's heart, that glowing, cursed heart, began to pound. This was wrong. This looked like poison, like something that had killed from the inside out. And she was standing over the body with chains that announced her guilt to anyone who saw. "We need to get back," Rowan said, already moving. Need to tell the Alpha King. Tell the Alpha King what? The voice came from behind them, cold and sharp as winter. Elder Thorn emerged from the forest, flanked by 4 warriors. His eyes found his son's body, and something flickered across his face. Grief, maybe, or something that looked like it. Then his gaze snapped to Yukiko, and his expression hardened into something terrible. You, he said, you did this. No, Yukiko started, but Thorn was already moving toward his son, dropping to his knees beside the body with surprising speed for a man his age. Marcus, he whispered, touching his son's cold face. Then louder, his voice breaking, Marcus! The warriors were circling now, their eyes on Yukiko, their bodies tense with barely contained violence. Rowan stepped between them and her, his partial shift still active. She didn't do this, he said firmly. She's been with me the entire time. We found him like this. Found him, Thorn repeated, standing slowly. Or you let her curse him. Let her death touch reach out from those chains and stop his heart. He turned to face them fully, and Yukiko saw the calculation beneath his grief. Saw how he was going to use this. The death curse has begun. Just as the prophecies warned, cursed blood brings only death. This wasn't a curse, Yukiko said, forcing her voice to remain steady. Look at him. That's poison, something he ingested. Silence. Thorn's roar shook the trees. You will not speak. You will not defend yourself. You are death itself, and my son... His voice cracked. My son is dead because your Alpha King let you live. More wolves were emerging from the forest now, drawn by Thorn's shouts. They surrounded the clearing, their faces shifting from confusion to horror as they saw the body, as they saw Yukiko standing nearby with her chains and her glowing heart and her cursed blood. The trial is over, Thorn declared. She's failed. Return her to the grave where she belongs. The trial lasts 3 months, Rowan said desperately. The council agreed. The council didn't anticipate this. Thorn gestured at his son's corpse. How many more must die before we admit we were wrong to let her breathe? The wolves were murmuring now, fear spreading through them like wildfire. Yukiko could smell it, could see how easily Thorn was manipulating them, using his son's death to destroy the fragile mercy McCloskey had won for her. Take her, Thorn ordered the warriors. Lock her in the North Tower until the council can vote again. This time, there will be no bargaining. Hands seized Yukiko's arms, and Rowan's protest was drowned out by the crowd's fearful voices. As they dragged her away from the clearing, away from the body with its blue lips and bloodshot eyes, Yukiko looked back once. Thorn was staring at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Not grief, not rage, satisfaction. The infection set in on the 13th day. Yukiko had known it was coming, had felt the heat spreading from her wrists and ankles, had seen the red streaks climbing up her forearms like crimson vines reaching for her heart. The wolfsbane was doing its job too well, preventing her body from healing, while the iron continued to burn. The combination was slowly poisoning her from the outside in. She couldn't tell anyone. Showing weakness now, after Marcus Jr.'s death, would be suicide. Half the pack believed she'd cursed him. The other half simply wanted her dead on principle. Even Cordelia, the healer, had stopped treating her wounds after Thorn's public declaration that Yukiko carried death in her veins. So Yukiko waited until the 3-hour window between midnight kitchen duty and dawn laundry service, when the compound was as close to empty as it ever got, and broke into the healer's storage room. The lock was simple, meant to keep out curious children, not desperate prisoners. Yukiko's chains clinked softly as she worked the mechanism with a bent wire she'd stolen from the laundry. The door swung open on hinges that needed oil, and she slipped inside, closing it behind her. The storage room was small and organized with military precision. Shelves lined 3 walls, filled with jars and pouches and bundles of dried herbs. Yukiko moved through the darkness by touch and memory, searching for what she needed. Honey to draw out infection, comfrey for the burns, clean bandages, maybe some willow bark for the pain that had become her constant companion. Her vision swam as she reached for a jar on the top shelf. The fever was worse than she'd thought. Her hands shook as she tried to grip the ceramic, and the jar slipped through her fingers, shattering on the stone floor with a sound like a death knell. Yukiko froze. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, heavy, purposeful. A guard making rounds. If they found her here stealing from the healer's supplies, Thorne would call it more evidence of her guilt. Would say she was gathering ingredients for curses, for poison, for whatever narrative he needed to justify her execution. She tried to move, to hide, but her legs gave out. The fever and exhaustion and 2 weeks of torture finally dragged her down, and she collapsed among the broken pottery, her chains clanging against the floor. The door opened. Torchlight flooded in, and Yukiko squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the shouts, the accusations, the hands that would drag her back to the council chamber. Instead, she heard a sharp intake of breath, then a voice she'd know anywhere, even in her fever-addled state. Moon's mercy, Yukiko. Her eyes flew open. McCloskey stood in the doorway, the torch in his hand casting harsh shadows across his face. He wore simple clothing, a linen shirt and dark pants, as if he'd been walking the compound unable to sleep. His amber eyes were wide with shock as he took in the scene. Yukiko on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and herbs, her bandages soaked through with blood and infection. "Don't," she whispered. "You can't touch me. The rules." But he was already moving, setting the torch in a wall bracket and kneeling beside her. Not touching, not quite, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could smell that scent that made her wolf howl with desperate need. Pine and winter storms and home. "Show me your wrists," he said, his voice rough. "McCloskey, if anyone sees—" "Show me." Yukiko's hands trembled as she held them out. The bandages were crude, already falling apart. And when McCloskey carefully, so carefully, began to unwrap them, his jaw clenched so hard she heard teeth grind. The skin beneath was a ruin. The iron had burned through to muscle in places, and the infection had turned the wounds an angry red streaked with black. Pus wept from splits in the scabs, and the smell was wrong, sweet and rotten, the scent of tissue dying. "You should have told someone," McCloskey said, though they both knew that was impossible. His hands hovered over her wounds, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "This could kill you. Everything could kill me." Yukiko's laugh came out broken. "That's rather the point of the trial, isn't it?" His eyes snapped to hers, and she saw pain there that matched her own. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I sleep at night knowing you're suffering? I think you're the Alpha King. I think you do what you must. What I must." He said it like a curse. "I can hear your heartbeat, Yukiko. Every moment of every day I hear it. When you're in pain, when you're afraid, when those bastards kick water on your work or step on your chains, I feel it. The mate bond doesn't let me forget for a single second that you're hurting and I can't stop it." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Yukiko stared at him, at this powerful man brought low by a connection neither of them had chosen. "I hear yours too," she admitted. "At night, when I'm alone in the servants' quarters, I can feel your heartbeat like it's my own. Sometimes it's the only thing that reminds me I'm still alive." Something shifted in McCloskey's expression. Grief and longing and frustration tangled together. Slowly, carefully, he reached toward her face. His hand stopped inches from her cheek, close enough that she could feel the intention behind the gesture, but not close enough to break the council's law. "If I could take this from you," he said softly. "If I could wear those chains instead, I would." in a heartbeat. I know. Yukiko found her own hand moving without permission, reaching toward his. Their fingers stopped a breath apart. So close she could feel the warmth of his skin, could imagine what it would feel like to close that final distance. But you can't. And we can't do this. If they catch us, I'm fighting for you. His voice was fierce now, urgent. Every day in council, I'm fighting Thorn and his allies. Maven is investigating Marcus Jr.'s death. We're going to prove it wasn't you. Prove that something else is happening here. And if you can't prove it? McCloskey's jaw clenched. Then I'll defy the council. I'll take you and run if I have to. I won't watch them bury you again. The words should have brought comfort. Instead, they terrified her. You'd lose everything. Your pack, your position, you're my mate. He said it like that explained everything. Like that justified burning the world down. Nothing else matters. Their hands were still hovering inches apart, the space between them charged with magnetic pull. Yukiko felt her control slipping, felt her fingers beginning to close the distance despite every rational thought screaming that this was suicide. The door crashed open. They jerked apart, guilt written across both their faces, as Maven burst into the storage room. The advisor's eyes took in the scene. McCloskey kneeling beside Yukiko. The obvious intimacy of their positions. The almost touch that had come within seconds of destroying everything. We have a problem, Maven said, her voice tight. A big one. McCloskey stood, putting proper distance between himself and Yukiko, though she could see the effort it cost him. What happened? Another death. Tessa Brightwater, one of the senior warrior's mates, collapsed during dinner service. Same symptoms as Marcus Jr. Blue lips, bloodshot eyes, foam at the mouth. Maven's gaze flicked to Yukiko. And this time, Yukiko was in the kitchens when it happened. Thorn's already calling it proof. He's demanding an emergency council vote. Yukiko's blood ran cold. The kitchens, of course. They'd assigned her to food preparation precisely so they could blame her when something like this happened. The trap had been set from the beginning. How long do we have? McCloskey asked. Council convenes at dawn. 3 hours. Maven's expression was grim. Thorn has the votes, McCloskey. This time he's going to win. McCloskey looked at Yukiko, and she saw everything he wanted to say written in his eyes. I'm sorry. I tried. I'm still trying. Please survive this. Get her wounds treated, he told Maven, and double the guard on the North Tower. If Thorn tries to take her before the vote, I want to know about it. What are you going to do? Maven asked. McCloskey's expression hardened into something dangerous. Find out who's really killing my pack members, because it sure as hell isn't her. He left without looking back, his footsteps echoing in the corridor. Maven moved to help Yukiko stand, her touch clinical and efficient as she examined the infected wounds. He's going to get himself killed defending you, Maven said quietly. You know that, right? Yukiko did know. Could feel it through their bond. His determination, his recklessness, his absolute refusal to let her die even if it cost him everything. Then we'd better figure out who's actually responsible, Yukiko said, forcing steel into her voice despite the fever and pain. Before Thorn destroys us both. Maven's lips quirked in something that might have been a smile. Now you're starting to think like a Luna. Outside, dawn was approaching, and with it, a vote that would decide whether Yukiko lived to see another sunset. The death curse, Thorn had called it. But as Maven cleaned her wounds and Yukiko's mind cleared enough to think, she realized something important. Curses didn't leave blue lips and bloodshot eyes. Curses didn't kill with precision and timing designed to maximize political impact. Poison did. And somewhere in this pack, someone was very carefully framing her for murder. The council vote didn't happen at dawn. McCloskey had used every ounce of his authority to delay it, demanding a full investigation before any execution was carried out. Thorne had pushed back hard, but enough elders were uncomfortable with the speed of everything. 2 deaths in 3 weeks, both blamed on a girl locked in chains, that they'd agreed to a 48-hour postponement. 2 days. That was all Yukiko had to prove her innocence. She spent the first 6 hours after Maven treated her wounds lying on the pallet in the North Tower, her mind racing despite her body's desperate need for rest. The pattern was there, if she could just see it clearly. Marcus Jr., found dead in the forest. Tessa Brightwater, collapsed during dinner service, both with the same symptoms. Both blamed on her. But there was something else. Something Maven had mentioned in passing while bandaging her wrists. Tessa was at the Unity Feast last week. So was Marcus. Both of them drank the ceremonial wine. The Unity Feast. A monthly gathering where the pack celebrated their bonds, and Elder Thorne blessed wine made from the sacred grapes that grew in the compound's private vineyard. It was tradition, ritual, one of the many ceremonies that held the pack together. And both victims had participated. Yukiko sat up too quickly, her head spinning. If the poison was in the ceremonial wine, then Thorne himself was administering it. But why? Why would an elder kill his own son? Unless that was the point. Unless Marcus Jr.'s death was meant to be the most convincing piece of evidence. What father would sacrifice his own child for a political goal? A desperate one, maybe, or a fanatic. The servants' assignments were posted each morning in the kitchens. Yukiko had learned to check them early, before the other servants could claim the easier tasks, and leave her with the worst. Today's list made her breath catch. Elder Chambers, deep cleaning, Yukiko Powell, Thorne's chambers. She was being sent directly into the wolf's den. It might be a trap. Probably was a trap, but it was also an opportunity. She wrapped her wrists carefully in fresh bandages, hiding the worst of the infection, and made her way through the compound's corridors. Her chains announced her presence with every step, and wolves pressed themselves against walls to avoid her, their faces twisted with fear and disgust. "The death curse," they whispered, "the cursed blood. Stay away or she'll kill you too." Thorne's chambers were in the east wing, reserved for high-ranking pack members. 2 guards flanked the door, both wearing expressions of barely concealed contempt. "You're late," one said, though Yukiko knew she wasn't. They just wanted an excuse to make her day worse. "Apologies," she said quietly, keeping her eyes down. Maven's advice echoed in her mind. Don't give them ammunition. Be small, be forgettable, survive. They let her through with obvious reluctance. The chambers beyond were lavish compared to the servants' quarters. Thick carpets, carved furniture, windows that actually let in light. The air smelled of pipe tobacco and old books and something else. Something bitter that made Yukiko's nose wrinkle. She started with the obvious tasks. Changing linens, dusting surfaces, sweeping floors. All the while, her eyes catalogued everything, searching for anything that might prove what she suspected. The main room revealed nothing. Neither did the bedchamber, though Yukiko's skin crawled at being surrounded by Thorne's possessions. His scent, the oppressive weight of his presence even in absence. She was about to give up when she noticed the door. Small, easy to miss, built into the wall between 2 bookcases. A private study. Every instinct screamed at her to leave it alone. But she'd come this far. 2 days. She had 2 days to find evidence or die. The door was locked, but the lock was old. Yukiko used her bent wire again, her hands steadier now despite the fever still burning through her veins. The mechanism clicked, and she slipped inside. The study was small and windowless, lit only by the light from the main chamber. A desk dominated the space, covered in papers and ledgers. but it was the shelf behind the desk that made Yukiko's heart race. Bottles, dozens of them, labeled in Thorne's precise handwriting. Most were mundane, sleeping drafts, pain tonics, herbs for common ailments. But tucked in the back, partially hidden behind larger containers, was a cluster of dark glass bottles with one word written on each label: Wolfsbane. Yukiko's hands trembled as she reached for one. Wolfsbane was used medicinally in tiny doses, but these bottles were large. Far larger than any healer would need, and the liquid inside was concentrated. She could tell by the viscosity, by the way it clung to the glass. This wasn't medicine. This was murder. She needed a sample, needed proof she could bring to McCloskey and Maven. Her fingers fumbled with the cork, and she managed to pour a small amount into a vial she'd stolen from the healer's storage room. The liquid was dark amber and smelled like bitter almonds and death. "What are you doing?" Yukiko spun. Thorne stood in the doorway of the study, flanked by his two personal guards. His face was calm, almost pleasant, but his eyes were cold as winter stone. Yukiko's mind raced. "I was cleaning. The door was open, I thought." The door was locked. Thorne stepped into the study, and the guards moved with him, blocking any escape. "You broke into my private space, searched through my belongings, stole from me." His eyes dropped to the vial clutched in her hand. "What do you think you found, cursed blood?" "Proof," Yukiko said, because there was no point lying now. "Proof that you're the one killing them, that you poisoned your own son to frame me." Something flickered across Thorne's face. Surprise that she'd figured it out, maybe, or respect for her audacity. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. "You're delusional," he said. "Driven mad by the infection and fever, you broke into an elder's chambers and fabricated accusations to save your worthless life." He turned to his guards. "She attacked me. I want that documented. She came at me with violence and you were forced to restrain her." Yukiko's blood turned to ice. "No." The guards moved faster than she could react. One ripped the vial from her hand, smashing it against the floor. The evidence, her only evidence, pooled across the stone and seeped between the cracks. The other guard grabbed her arms, his grip brutal on her infected wrists, and Yukiko screamed as pain exploded through her body. "Resisting," Thorne noted calmly. "Add that to the report. She's clearly dangerous. Unstable." The guard holding her arms twisted them behind her back, and something in Yukiko's left wrist gave way with a sound like green wood snapping. The pain was blinding, absolute, and she sagged in the guard's grip, consciousness wavering. "Careful," Thorne said. "We need her alive for the council vote. I want them to see what cursed blood does when cornered, how violent it becomes, how right we were to fear it." Through the agony, through the fever and broken bone and shattered hope, Yukiko understood. This was always the plan. Let her investigate, let her find evidence, then destroy it and her credibility in one move. Make her look deranged, make her look dangerous, make her execution seem like mercy. The guard shoved her toward the door, and Yukiko stumbled, her chains tangling, sending her crashing to the floor. The impact jarred her broken wrist and she vomited from the pain, her body's involuntary response to trauma it couldn't process. "Get her out of my sight," Thorne said, his voice filled with disgust. "Put her in isolation. No visitors, no contact. Let the fever and infection finish what I started." They dragged her through the corridors, and Yukiko's consciousness flickered in and out like a dying candle. She caught glimpses, horrified faces of servants, the cold stone floor passing beneath her, the stairs leading down to the isolation cells beneath the North Tower. The cell door slammed shut with a finality that sounded like a grave closing. Yukiko lay on the cold stone, cradling her broken wrist against her chest, and felt McCloskey's heartbeat through their bond. It was racing, panicked. He'd felt her pain, her fear, would be trying to reach her right now. But Thorne had isolated her perfectly. No witnesses to what had really happened. No proof of the wolfsbane. just a cursed girl's word against an elder's testimony, and everyone knew cursed blood couldn't be trusted. 2 days she'd had. She'd wasted one of them getting broken and thrown in a hole. Yukiko closed her eyes and tried to remember how to breathe through pain that seemed infinite, tried to hold on to the image of McCloskey tearing through earth to reach her, of Isla's clean water and kind eyes, of Rowan's quiet support. Tried to believe that truth mattered more than power. Above her, in the council chambers, Elder Thorne was preparing his final argument, the one that would end with her execution. And Yukiko had nothing left to fight him with except a heartbeat that refused, despite everything, to stop. McCloskey felt the exact moment Yukiko's wrist broke. He was in the training grounds, sparring with Maven to burn off the restless energy that had plagued him since the council's delay, when pain exploded through his left arm with such intensity that he dropped his practice blade and fell to his knees. The mate bond carried it to him in waves, sharp, blinding agony followed by nausea and the unmistakable sensation of bone grinding against bone. McCloskey! Maven was beside him instantly, her hand on his shoulder. What? Yukiko. Her name came out as a growl. Someone's hurting her. Someone's... Another wave of pain, this time accompanied by the taste of copper in his mouth. She was vomiting, bleeding. Something was very, very wrong. He was on his feet and running before Maven could stop him, his wolf surging forward with murderous intent. The mate bond pulled him like a rope tied around his ribs, guiding him through corridors and down stairs he'd never used, into the depths of the compound where isolation cells held prisoners too dangerous or too valuable to execute immediately. The guards at the bottom of the stairs saw him coming and wisely moved aside. McCloskey tore open cell doors one by one until he found her. The sight made his vision go red. Yukiko lay crumpled on the stone floor, unconscious, her body curved protectively around her left arm. Her wrist was swollen to twice its normal size, bent at an angle that made McCloskey's stomach turn. Blood soaked through her bandages from wounds that had torn open, and her fever-flushed face was covered in bruises that hadn't been there this morning. Someone had beaten her. Someone had broken her. Someone had thrown his mate into a cell like garbage and left her to die. McCloskey's wolf exploded forward without permission. His bones cracked and reformed, his spine lengthening, his face elongating into a muzzle filled with teeth designed for killing. He didn't complete the shift, couldn't, or he'd lose the ability to speak. But he hovered in that space between human and beast, his body a weapon of fur and claws and rage. His roar shook the foundations of the compound. Footsteps thundered on the stairs. Guards, warriors, servants, drawn by the sound of their Alpha King losing control. They crowded the narrow corridor, their faces shifting from confusion to shock as they saw McCloskey in partial transformation, saw Yukiko broken on the cell floor. Who did this? His voice was barely recognizable, distorted by the wolf's vocal cords. Who touched her? The guards looked at each other, fear written across their features. One finally spoke, his voice trembling. Elder Thorne's orders, Alpha King. She broke into his chambers, attacked him. We were told to restrain her and... Restrain. McCloskey looked at Yukiko's broken wrist, at the blood and bruises. You call this restraint? She resisted. McCloskey moved faster than the guard could track, his clawed hand closing around the man's throat and lifting him off the ground. You broke her wrist. You beat her while she was in chains. You left her to die in a cell. Each word came out measured, deadly. Give me one reason I shouldn't tear out your throat. McCloskey! Maven's voice cut through his rage. She stood at the entrance to the corridor, her expression horrified. Put him down. This isn't helping. They hurt her. It came out as a snarl. They broke the terms of the trial. She was supposed to suffer, yes, but this... He gestured at Yukiko's unconscious form. This is torture. This is attempted murder. And killing your own guard will start a civil war. Maven moved closer, carefully, like approaching a rabid animal. Is that what you want? To tear this pack apart? Yes, his wolf screamed. Yes, burn it all down. Kill anyone who hurt her. Protect mate, protect mate, protect. McCloskey's hand tightened around the guard's throat, and the man's face began to turn purple. It would be so easy. One squeeze. One quick death to repay the agony Yukiko had suffered. Through the mate bond, he felt her heartbeat. Faint. Erratic. Fading. He dropped the guard, who collapsed gasping at his feet. Get Cordelia, McCloskey ordered, his voice still distorted. Now. If she refuses, tell her I'll drag her down here myself. Warriors scattered to obey. McCloskey moved into the cell, his partially shifted body folding down beside Yukiko. He couldn't touch her. The council's law still stood. But he could be close. Could let her unconscious mind feel his presence through their bond. I'm here, he whispered, knowing she couldn't hear but needing to say it anyway. I'm here, and I'm going to fix this. I swear it. More footsteps on the stairs, these heavier and more numerous. McCloskey's hackles rose as he scented who approached. Elder Thorne, flanked by half the council, and at least 20 warriors loyal to the old guard. Thorne stopped at the cell entrance, his expression carefully neutral as he took in the scene. Alpha King, I heard you'd discovered our prisoner's condition. Unfortunate but necessary. She attacked me in my own chambers. My guards had no choice but to... Liar. McCloskey's wolf spoke the word with absolute certainty. She weighs maybe 120 pounds. Half of that is chains and infection. You expect me to believe she attacked an elder and 2 armed guards? Cursed blood makes people desperate. Thorne's voice was maddeningly calm. She broke into my private study, stole from me, and when confronted became violent. It's all documented. My guards witnessed everything. Your guards, who answer to you. Your chambers, where only you control access. How convenient. McCloskey forced himself toward human shape, the transformation agonizing but necessary. He needed words now, not claws. What was she looking for in your study, Thorne? What were you hiding? Something flickered in the elder's eyes, too quick to identify, but McCloskey caught it. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. I hide nothing, Thorne said. But I will not be interrogated like a criminal by an Alpha King who has lost all perspective. Look at yourself, McCloskey, partially shifted, threatening your own guards, defending a girl whose very existence violates pack law. You're compromised. The mate bond has corrupted your judgment. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered wolves. McCloskey saw the calculation in Thorne's eyes, saw how carefully this moment had been orchestrated. Not just to destroy Yukiko, but to destroy him too. My judgment, McCloskey said coldly, tells me that something is very wrong with this situation. 2 pack members dead with identical symptoms. Both attended feasts where you blessed the ceremonial wine. And now my mate, who was investigating those deaths, is beaten and left to die after supposedly attacking you in the very chambers where evidence might be found. Are you accusing me of murder? Thorne's voice rose, perfectly calculated outrage. Me, who lost his own son to this curse. Me, who has served this pack for 40 years. I'm saying the timing is convenient. I'm saying the evidence is circumstantial. I'm saying we need a real investigation before anyone else dies. The only investigation needed is into your fitness to lead. Thorne turned to address the council members present. I call for an emergency vote. Alpha King McCloskey Bryce has violated the terms of the trial by threatening guards who were following lawful orders. He has shown preferential treatment to a prisoner condemned by pack law. He has allowed his mate Bond to override his duty to this pack. His eyes glittered with triumph. I move that he be temporarily removed from power until a full council can determine his fitness to rule. The corridor erupted into chaos. Some wolves shouted agreement, others protest. The pack was fracturing before McCloskey's eyes, dividing into those who believed in the old laws and those who believed in their Alpha King. Maven pushed through the crowd, her face grim. McCloskey, we need to leave. Now, before this turns into open combat. But McCloskey couldn't move. Couldn't leave Yukiko unconscious and broken in a cell while Thorne orchestrated his downfall. The mate bond screamed at him to protect her, to gather her in his arms and run until they found somewhere safe, somewhere the Council's laws couldn't reach. "I won't abandon her," he said. "You won't help her by starting a war you can't win." Maven's voice was urgent. "Thorne has been planning this for weeks, maybe longer, every move calculated to back you into a corner. If you fight now, you'll lose. The Council will vote you out, execute her, and install Thorne as Alpha King by sunset." She was right. McCloskey knew she was right. But everything in him rebelled against the strategic retreat, against leaving his mate broken and vulnerable while he played politics. Cordelia arrived finally, pushing through the crowd with her healer's bag. She took one look at Yukiko, and her expression tightened. "She needs surgery. That wrist won't heal properly without it, and the infection is spreading. If she doesn't get treatment in the next few hours..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. McCloskey looked at Thorne, at the elder's calm satisfaction, and understood with perfect clarity that this was the plan. Wait for Yukiko to die from her injuries, blame it on the curse or the infection or her own weakness. Either way, she'd be gone and McCloskey would be left powerless, his authority undermined, his judgment questioned. Unless he did something Thorne didn't expect. "Treat her," McCloskey told Cordelia. "Fully. Surgery, medicines, whatever she needs. That's an Alpha King's direct order. The Council," Thorne began, "can vote on my fitness to rule after I've ensured my mate doesn't die from injuries sustained by guards under your command." McCloskey's voice carried through the corridor with absolute authority. "We'll convene in the Great Hall at sunset, every council member present, every accusation answered, but first she gets medical treatment." He turned to face Thorne directly. "Because if she dies, Elder, there won't be a council vote. There will be a challenge. You and me under the full moon, wolf to wolf, and I promise you, if she dies, I will tear you apart slowly enough that you beg for mercy you'll never receive." The threat hung in the air, undeniable and absolute. Thorne's face went pale, but he held his ground. "So be it," the elder said. "Sunset, the Great Hall. We'll see which matters more to you, your pack or your cursed mate." He left, taking his supporters with him. The corridor slowly emptied until only McCloskey, Maven, and Cordelia remained with Yukiko's unconscious form. "Can you save her?" McCloskey asked quietly. Cordelia knelt beside Yukiko, her hands gentle as she examined the broken wrist. "Maybe, if the moon goddess is merciful, and the infection hasn't reached her heart." "Then start," McCloskey said. "I'll deal with the Council." He forced himself to walk away, every step an agony as the mate bond stretched between them. But Maven was right. Fighting now would only get them both killed. He needed a different strategy. Needed proof of Thorne's conspiracy. Needed something that would turn the Council before sunset. He had 6 hours. It would have to be enough. The full moon rose blood red over the ceremonial grounds, and Yukiko knew something was wrong. Cordelia had worked miracles. The surgery had taken 3 hours, setting, bones, and cleaning infection with ruthless efficiency. Yukiko's wrist was now splinted and wrapped, the worst of the fever broken by medicines she couldn't name. She was weak, barely able to stand, but alive. And the Council had decided, in a vote split so evenly it came down to the blind elder's deciding voice, that she would attend the sunset gathering. "Let the pack see what their Alpha King protects," Thorne had said, his smile cold. "Let them judge whether cursed blood is worth tearing their world apart." So Yukiko stood now at the edge of the ceremonial circle, chains weighing heavy on her healing body, while 700 wolves gathered for the emergency council session that would determine McCloskey's fate and her own. The full moon made everything feel charged, dangerous. Wolves in human form struggled against the urge to shift, their eyes reflecting gold in the firelight. McCloskey stood at the circle's center, facing the council. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days, but his voice was steady as he addressed the assembled pack. Elder Thorn accuses me of compromising my judgment, of allowing the mate bond to override my duty. I stand before you to answer these charges and to present evidence of a conspiracy that threatens us all. Conspiracy. Thorn's voice dripped contempt. You see plots where there are only traditions violated. You see enemies where there are only elders trying to preserve our laws. Then explain the wolfsbane. Maven stepped forward, holding a sealed container. This morning, on the Alpha King's orders, I searched your private vineyard, the one where you grow grapes for ceremonial wine. I found this buried near the roots. She opened the container, revealing soil darkened with liquid. The ground is saturated with concentrated wolfsbane. Every grape grown there is poisoned. Every bottle of ceremonial wine you've blessed for the past 2 months contains enough poison to kill slowly over time. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Thorn's face remained calm, but Yukiko saw his hands clench. Ridiculous. That soil sample could be from anywhere. This is a desperate attempt to... I also found your financial records. Maven's voice cut through his protest. Payments to known rogues, dates that correspond exactly with the attacks on our borders. You've been hiring mercenaries to destabilize the pack, to make it look like we're under siege. She turned to address the council directly. The 2 deaths weren't caused by a curse. They were assassinations designed to frame Yukiko and undermine the Alpha King's authority. The pack erupted into chaos. Wolves shouting, some in disbelief, others in rage. Thorn's supporters looked stunned. His carefully constructed narrative was collapsing. More lies, Thorn said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Fabricated evidence from an Alpha King who would burn this pack to protect his cursed... The howl that cut him off came from the forest. Not one howl, dozens, the sound of wolves moving in coordinated formation, converging on the ceremonial grounds from all directions. Yukiko's blood turned to ice as she recognized the pattern. This wasn't a random attack. This was military precision. Rogues! A warrior shouted from the perimeter. Rogues breaching the eastern border. The pack's warriors shifted instantly, clothing tearing as they took wolf form to meet the threat. But Yukiko's eyes weren't on the forest. They were on Thorn's face, where she saw not surprise but grim satisfaction. And they were on Isla, standing 20 feet away with a cluster of young wolves, her face pale with fear as she looked toward the tree line. The attack wasn't random. It was orchestrated. And Isla, McCloskey's sister, the only family he had left, was positioned exactly where the rogues would break through. This was the final move. Frame the attack on rogues, kill Isla in the chaos, blame it on the instability McCloskey's protection of Yukiko had caused. Even if Thorn's conspiracy was exposed, McCloskey would be too destroyed by his sister's death to lead. The pack would fracture. And in the chaos, Thorn could seize control. Yukiko saw it all with perfect clarity. Saw the rogues emerging from the forest, 6 massive wolves, scarred and battle-hardened, moving with deadly purpose toward the cluster of young pack members. Saw Isla standing frozen, too young to fight, too terrified to run. Saw the warriors too far away, too engaged with other attackers to reach her in time. Saw that she was the only one close enough to stop this. The chains on her wrists were iron blessed with wolfsbane. Unbreakable, they'd told her. Designed to hold her until death or exile. But Yukiko wasn't trying to break free anymore. She was trying to save a 12-year-old girl who'd given her clean water and kindness when everyone else offered only hate. Something in her chest ignited. Her glowing heart, that cursed, supernatural heart, pulsed with light so bright it was visible through her dress. The mate bond with McCloskey flared like a solar flare, and she felt his strength flowing into her, felt his wolf lending her power she shouldn't possess. Yukiko pulled against the chains. Her broken wrist screamed in agony, but she pulled harder. The iron shackles cut into her flesh, drawing blood, but she pulled. The wolfsbane burned, but she pulled. The left shackle exploded, then the right. Metal fragments scattered across the ceremonial ground as Yukiko's wolf surged forward with a force that couldn't be denied. Her bones cracked and reformed, her spine lengthened. Fur erupted from her skin in waves of silver white that glowed like captured moonlight. She was massive, larger than any female wolf should be, her glowing heart visible even in wolf form, pulsing beneath her chest like a beacon. The transformation that had been denied for 3 months took her in seconds, and when she threw back her head and howled, the sound carried the rage of every injustice, every cruelty, every moment she'd been forced to suffer in silence. The lead rogue was 10 feet from Isla when Yukiko intercepted him. She hit him like a freight train, all 160 pounds of glowing wolf slamming into his flank and driving him sideways. Her teeth found his throat before he could recover, and she tore without mercy, without hesitation. He died gurgling, blood spraying across the ceremonial ground. The other rogues turned toward her, recognizing the greater threat. Yukiko placed herself between them and Isla, her lips pulled back from teeth designed for killing, her glowing fur making her look like something out of legend rather than reality. They attacked as one. Yukiko met them with violence born of 3 months of chains and torture and helplessness finally unleashed. She was faster than them, stronger than she should be. The mate bond and her supernatural heart giving her power that defied natural law. One rogue went down with his spine broken, another lost an eye and fled. The remaining 3 circled, wary now, realizing their prey had become a predator. McCloskey arrived like thunder given form. His wolf was enormous, easily 250 pounds of black fur and lethal intent. He tore into the remaining rogues with methodical brutality, and within seconds it was over. 6 bodies lay scattered around the ceremonial circle, and Isla stood unharmed behind Yukiko's glowing form, her eyes wide with shock. Yukiko shifted back to human, the transformation leaving her naked and covered in blood that wasn't hers. She swayed, exhaustion and pain finally catching up, but forced herself to stay standing, to face the pack that had gathered to watch her die and show them she was still here, still fighting, still alive. There. Thorne's voice rose above the stunned silence. You see? She shifted during the trial. She broke the terms. She's dangerous, unstable. She saved my sister. McCloskey's voice was quiet, but it carried through the grounds like a death sentence. He shifted back to human, his amber eyes fixed on Thorne with lethal focus. Your hired rogues were sent to kill Isla, to destroy me through her death. But you didn't account for one thing, Thorne. I don't know what you're talking about, Thorne said, but his voice shook. You didn't account for love. McCloskey moved toward the elder with predatory grace. The kind of love that breaks chains, the kind that tears through earth to save someone buried alive, the kind that makes a cursed girl throw herself between assassins and a child she barely knows. He stopped 5 feet from Thorne. Maven's evidence proves your conspiracy. But this... He gestured at the dead rogues, at Isla standing safe, at Yukiko glowing in the moonlight. This proves your intent. Murder, treason, attempted regicide. Thorne's face had gone gray. The council will decide... I'm done with council votes. McCloskey's voice dropped to something lethal. I challenge you, Thorne, right here, right now, wolf to wolf. Leadership of this pack goes to whoever walks away. The pack roared approval. This was old law, primal law, the law that predated councils and ceremonies, combat for dominance, winner takes all. Thorne looked at the pack, at McCloskey, at the trap he'd built finally closing around him. You can't. I'm an elder. You're a traitor who killed his own son for political gain. McCloskey's words fell like hammer blows. Fight me or submit. Those are your options. Thorne's face twisted with hate and fear. Then he shifted. A large gray wolf, battle-scarred and vicious. He lunged without warning, going for McCloskey's throat with the desperate fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. McCloskey met him mid-air. The fight was brutal and shockingly one-sided. McCloskey was younger, stronger, and fighting with the righteous fury of someone protecting everything he loved. He avoided Thorne's attacks with contemptuous ease and delivered punishing blows in return. Within 2 minutes, Thorne was limping. Within 5, he was on his back, McCloskey's jaws locked around his throat. One bite. That's all it would take to end this. But McCloskey held position, his growl vibrating through Thorne's vulnerable flesh. A question asked without words. Submit or die? Thorne went limp. Submission. Defeat. McCloskey released him and shifted back to human, standing over the broken elder. You're exiled, marked as rogue. If you're found on Packlands after sunrise, anyone can kill you without consequence. He turned to face the pack, his voice carrying to every wolf present. The law of blood atonement is abolished. Tonight, no child will be punished for their parents' crimes ever again. His eyes found Yukiko, and the mate bond between them blazed like starfire. And Yukiko Powell is my mate, my Luna, and anyone who touches her answers to me. The pack howled, not in protest this time, but in acceptance. In celebration. The old guard had fallen. A new era had begun. And Yukiko, standing in the moonlight with her glowing heart and broken chains, finally allowed herself to collapse. Yukiko woke 3 days later in chambers she didn't recognize. Sunlight streamed through windows that actually opened, warming air that smelled of pine and clean linens instead of stone and despair. Her wrist was properly set and wrapped, the infection gone, her body clean and dressed in soft clothing that bore no bloodstains or chains. For a disorienting moment, she thought she might be dead, that the ceremonial grounds had been her final battleground, and this was whatever came after. Then she felt the heartbeat. Not hers alone, but his too, synchronized perfectly, the mate bond humming between them like a plucked string. McCloskey was close. Very close. She turned her head and found him asleep in a chair beside the bed, his body angled protectively toward her, even in unconsciousness. His hand rested on the mattress, inches from hers, close enough to touch, but still maintaining that careful distance that had defined their entire relationship. Except the trial was over. The law that had forbidden contact was abolished, and Yukiko's fingers moved without conscious thought, closing those final inches to brush against his. McCloskey's eyes opened instantly, amber and alert. Then they softened as they found hers, and something in his expression, relief so profound it was almost painful, made Yukiko's chest tighten. "You're awake," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Thank the moon goddess. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Cordelia said it was exhaustion and blood loss, and your body finally giving itself permission to rest." 3 days? Yukiko tried to sit up, but her body protested. McCloskey was there immediately, his hands, finally touching her without fear of consequences, supporting her shoulders, helping her settle against the pillows. His touch was warm and careful and absolutely right. The mate bond sang between them, satisfied at last. "What happened?" Yukiko asked. "After I collapsed. Thorne." "Gone." McCloskey's voice was hard. He was escorted to the border at dawn and marked with the exile brand. If he's seen on Packlands, he'll be killed on sight. His supporters were given the choice to follow him or submit to my authority. Most chose to stay. And the council? Voted unanimously to abolish the law of blood atonement. It took exactly 10 minutes of debate. A bitter smile crossed his face. Turns out when an elder is exposed as a murderer and traitor, his supporters lose their enthusiasm for his policies. Yukiko absorbed this, hardly daring to believe it. The law that had defined her entire life, that had killed her mother and tried to kill her, simply gone, erased by a vote. "The chains," she said, looking down at her wrists. The burns were still there, still healing, but the iron shackles were gone. When did they? You broke them yourself when you shifted to save Isla. McCloskey's hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers with exquisite gentleness. But there's a ceremony, a formal reversal of the trial. The council requested it. They want to atone, I think, for what they put you through. When? Tomorrow night, if you're strong enough. His thumb traced circles on her palm. But first, there's something I need to do. He stood and moved to a chest at the foot of the bed, retrieving something wrapped in black silk. When he returned and unwrapped it, Yukiko's breath caught. Her mother's jade ring, the one the guards had taken before they buried her. I found it in Thorne's private collection, McCloskey said quietly. He kept trophies of his victims. I thought you might want it back. Yukiko took the ring with trembling hands. It was warm, as if her mother's love still lived in the stone. She slipped it onto her finger and felt something inside her chest, some wound she'd carried for 2 years, finally, begin to heal. Thank you, she whispered. McCloskey leaned forward, his forehead resting gently against hers. You saved my sister's life. You broke chains that shouldn't have been breakable. You survived things that would have killed anyone else. His voice was fierce. Thank you. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, their heartbeats perfectly aligned. Then McCloskey pulled back, his expression turning serious. The pack wants to complete the Luna ceremony, he said. The proper one, where you're crowned as my mate and queen, but only if you want it. You've been through enough forced rituals. This one has to be your choice. Yukiko thought about the last ceremony, the grave, the suffocation, the taste of dirt and death. Thought about how far she'd come from that buried girl to this moment, sitting in sunlight with her mate's hand in hers. Yes, she said. I want it. McCloskey's smile was incandescent. 3 months later, Yukiko stood at the edge of the ceremonial circle and marveled at how different everything looked. The circle was the same, ancient stones marking sacred ground, but where before there had been a grave dug in preparation for her death, now there were flowers. Hundreds of them, planted by pack members who'd come one by one over the past weeks to apologize, to offer tribute, to ask forgiveness for their part in her suffering. The pack had transformed under McCloskey's new leadership. The old hierarchies based on bloodline had been dismantled. Wolves were judged by their actions, not their ancestors' crimes. And the law of blood atonement, that ancient, cruel law, had been replaced with something radical: mercy. Ready? Maven appeared at Yukiko's elbow, dressed in formal robes. The advisor had become an unexpected friend, her sharp pragmatism balanced by a dry humor that made Yukiko laugh even on difficult days. Ready, Yukiko confirmed. She wore white, traditional for Luna ceremonies, but this dress bore embroidery that told her story. Silver chains breaking, a wolf glowing with moonlight, a heart that pulsed with supernatural light. The pack's seamstresses had worked for weeks on it, turning her trauma into something beautiful. Maven walked with her into the circle, and the pack, 700 strong, fell silent. They'd gathered under the full moon, the same moon that had witnessed her burial, her trial, her breaking point, and her triumph. But tonight, they gathered in celebration. McCloskey waited at the circle's center, dressed in the formal robes of the Alpha King. His amber eyes found hers across the distance, and the mate bond between them blazed with joy so pure it made Yukiko's glowing heart pulse brighter. The blind elder, the one who'd cast the deciding vote to spare Yukiko's life during the trial, stepped forward to officiate. Her voice was strong despite her age, carrying across the ceremonial grounds with the weight of tradition. We gather under the full moon to complete what was interrupted, she began. To crown a Luna who was buried and rose again, to witness a bond that broke chains and rewrote destiny. She turned to Yukiko. Yukiko Powell, daughter of tragedy, survivor of injustice, protector of the innocent. Do you accept the role of Luna? Do you swear to guide this pack with wisdom, to defend it with courage, and to love its Alpha King with a heart that will never stop beating? I swear it, Yukiko said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The elder turned to McCloskey. McCloskey Bryce, Alpha King who defied death to save his mate. Do you accept Yukiko as your Luna? Do you swear to honor her, to protect her, and to rule beside her as equals under the moon goddess's gaze? I swear it, McCloskey said, his voice breaking with emotion. I'd swear it 1,000 times. The elder smiled. Then by the authority granted to me by tradition, and by the pack's collective will, I declare Yukiko Powell to be Luna of the Moonstone Pack. She placed a crown of woven silver and moonstone on Yukiko's head. May her light guide us through darkness. May her strength inspire us to be better. May her heart, that glowing, impossible heart, remind us that curses can become blessings when met with courage. The pack howled, a sound of pure joy that echoed off the mountains and seemed to reach the moon itself. McCloskey closed the distance between them in 3 strides. His hands cupped her face with exquisite gentleness. His thumbs brushing away tears Yukiko hadn't realized she was crying. I heard your heartbeat through 6 feet of earth, he whispered, and I've been following that sound ever since. It led me to you. It saved us both. It's your heartbeat too, Yukiko whispered back. They've been the same since the moment you pulled me from that grave. Not the same, McCloskey corrected. United. 2 hearts that found each other in darkness and refused to let go. When they kissed, the pack's howls intensified, celebrating not a blood offering or a ritual sacrifice, but something far more powerful. Love that had survived burial, torture, conspiracy, and death itself. Yukiko's heart glowed brighter, the light visible even to wolves standing at the circle's edge. The blind elder had been right. She was a heartkeeper, a Luna whose bond with her Alpha King was so powerful it manifested physically. The old wolves spoke of heartkeepers in legends, said they appeared once in a generation, that they brought transformation and renewal to packs brave enough to accept them. As the celebration continued around them, as pack members approached one by one to pledge loyalty to their new Luna, Yukiko looked down at the ground where her grave had been. The flowers had covered it completely, turning death into beauty, trauma into triumph. She had been buried alive in this circle, had tasted earth and death and despair, had been condemned for blood she didn't spill and crimes she didn't commit. But she had risen, had broken chains that couldn't be broken, had become Luna not despite her cursed bloodline, but because of everything she'd survived. And standing in the center of the ceremonial circle with McCloskey's hand in hers, with her glowing heart beating in perfect sync with his, with the full moon blessing their union and the pack howling their approval, Yukiko Powell finally understood what her mother had died to protect. Not just her life, her right to write her own story, her chance to prove that destiny could be rewritten by those brave enough to claw their way back from death, her opportunity to transform a curse into a crown. The Luna ceremony was complete at last. Not with death, but with love. Not with burial, but with rebirth. And as the moon reached its apex and the pack danced around them in celebration, Yukiko closed her eyes and sent a silent thank you to the mother who'd sacrificed everything, to the heartbeat that had refused to stop, and to the Alpha King who'd heard it beating through the earth and decided that some loves were worth tearing the world apart to save. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.